My name is Gurpreet Singh, and I'm on the Skoll Foundation team. I've long admired the EkStep Foundation's work, and I'm very excited to join you for this virtual event on the societal platform approach. As you may know, the Skoll World Forum is held in Oxford, England each year, bringing together more than 1,000 leaders from across the social change ecosystem. This year, though, we were forced to cancel the in-person event to avoid further spread of COVID-19. But with our community's patience and support, we were able to switch to a virtual format. Fortunately, this means that even more people from all over the world can join us for a week of learning and connecting. And this wouldn't be possible without hosts like EkStep Foundation, who organized a virtual session within just a couple of weeks while managing the logistical messiness that comes with such a quick transition. In fact, this year, the forum's theme is collective strength. We thought that there was no better way to reflect that theme than to build a new forum experience together with our network partners. More than 80 organizations have contributed to virtual events this week. And to catch other events and stay updated, please head to skoll.org and navigate to the master schedule. Also, in addition to the dozens of independently hosted events like this one, we invite you to join us this Thursday, April 2nd at 11 a.m. Eastern US time for the Skoll Awards broadcast, where we'll reveal this year's Skoll awardees for social entrepreneurship. Finally, I'd like to encourage you to spread word about this session and what you've learned, any say pithy quotes that you've heard on social media using the hashtag SkollGoesVirtual. Thank you to those who are joining us from very odd times from your parts of the world, and to our EkStep Foundation friends for organizing this session. I believe they're joining us at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time and taking us till 10 p.m. their time. So extra thank you for making this happen. And now I'll turn it over to Sahana and Sanjay to kick us off. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gurpreet, and thank you everyone for being part of this session. I will not dwell into any introductions. I'm going to quickly talk about a few housekeeping, which is something that I'm not able to figure out, but I'll do that in terms of how to get everyone to display view who's participating, but just a few housekeeping. Over the next 90 minutes, we have kind of designed it in such a way that we could facilitate more interactions during the session. So we've broken the session in such a way that it's chunks of 18 minutes with Q&A every 10 minutes. So and towards the end, there's a longer kind of a period for Q&A. So we'll try and keep this as interactive as possible, and you could ask your questions during these allotted slots. Besides that, we hope, to make it interactive, we hope you all participate, and you could either use the raise hand or use the Q&A or the chat options to share your questions. And and on that note, I'll hand it over to Sanjay.
Thank you, Sahana, and thank you, Gurpreet, thanks to the Skoll Foundation for providing this possibility, this forum. I'm so glad that the video is on. So, Sahana, can you turn on my video as well? It says the host has declined, and so you are the host, so please. But welcome to everyone, and we are so delighted that we have an opportunity to share this thought process with you. Before I get started, just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Sanjay. I'm the Chief Curator at EkStep Foundation. EkStep Foundation is a foundation based out of India. It is the foundation of Rohini and Nandan Nilekani. And our work essentially spans across multiple missions, including education. And through our work in societal platform, we go cross-sectoral into all the dimensions of development, as you see in the presentation and discussion today. The way I thought I would spend a little bit of time with you today is to share with you why, how did we get to this idea? What have we learned so far? And then how some illustrations, how are we addressing some of the large and complex societal challenges? And then sort of shape it into a discussion towards the end as to how could we use this learning in the context of the COVID response. And that's the area where I would love to hear more and more of your thoughts as you sort of think through the session as it proceeds. So I will try to keep it short bursts of monologues and a little bit of discussion because in the current lockdown situation, unfortunately, that's the best we are able to manage. So let me get started with that background. First, let me spend a little bit of time to talk about why of this whole idea and where we are now with this whole thinking.
Okay, Sanjay, I'm just going to interrupt. There are some requests where people are saying your voice is feeble. So could you come closer to the mic?
Okay, is this any better?
Also, I think you should be able to share, use your video option. So if you could, please.
All right. That's true. But given the audio requirements, you'll see a lot big face of mine because I'm like literally speaking into the laptop. But I hope you can hear me now.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, super. All right. So let me go back into the context from where we are coming. And so as you know that India is very large and diverse. It's a country of 1.3 billion people, 22 official languages, 5% of the country pays income tax, which will give you a sense of what is the kind of income levels on an average across the country, about 300 million migrants, 1 billion phones, 400 million smartphones, and about 450 million internet users. Of course, these statistics keep changing all the time, but I hope you get a sense of when we say population scale, when we say large scale change, the frame of mind that we are operating from. Rewinding back a bit into history, this thought process that we'll talk about today took its roots when we were mulling with a very large question, which is how can we empower 1 billion residents of India with a unique identity and a digital platform to authenticate any large question. And that is what led to the genesis of the program, the Unique Identification Program of India, which the Indian government drove in a very significant manner. And that was a lot of learning there. This program, this presentation today is not about the Aadhaar program. It is about how we learned from that program, how we abstracted certain learnings. And we realized that we were able to connect with 1 billion users in 5.5 years. And as we looked at more and more platforms across the world, ranging from what started off with Windows in 1985 to where we are today, we realized that this was quite a run to have 1 billion people connected up to a system in a year, and that to a system that was not a mandatory requirement. It was on people's voluntary will that people were joining. So we started thinking, what is it that we were learning here? And then it went on to say there were more things, because on top of this, a lot of other innovations happened, which today in India are called the India Stack. And today I don't intend to go into deep dive into what is India Stack and what are its different capabilities, but just to mention that a sort of a family of platforms in that sense spun off in this process, which had implications for how we do direct benefit transfer, how we do financial inclusion of people who don't have bank accounts, health insurance, payment systems, skilling education, digital lending, tax restructuring. And so it was again a very interesting experience through this process. And recently the BIS came out with this whole analysis of what was its implication for India. And India's financial inclusion status, obviously we have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. But the position that we might have statistically achieved in 46 years is something that was achieved between 2011 and 2018. So obviously there were a lot of lessons to learn as to why is it that we are able to see a certain kind of velocity, a certain kind of behavior change, a certain kind of infrastructure development. What are we learning from here? And then we started asking ourselves bigger questions, a lot more questions. How can we deliver affordable credit to 100 million first-time formal borrowers in the next 5 years? How can we increase access to learning opportunities for 200 million children by 2020? How can we transform governance through an open digital infrastructure for 2,000 towns, cities and towns by 2020? How do we then extend financial protection to 100 million low-income households towards secondary and tertiary healthcare and so on and so forth? Obviously, these are long journeys. Each of these are marathon questions, but we said do we have the ability to imagine, think, design, and start this journey so that over the next 8 to 10 years, we are able to set a very different place from an equilibrium perspective. With those questions in our mind, as we were looking at what was happening, we started mulling some very important questions. The classical question that was being discussed in the development context was, how do we scale what works? And we started asking a question, what works at scale? And how do we understand what's the balance between these two questions? Because what works may not scale and what scales may not work. So the question was, what works at scale? Essentially, how do you get the right outcomes at scale? And that led us to another family of questions that when we were talking to the different leaders across government, civil society, private sector, people were talking about rapid growth, whereas we were more and more wondering about what does it take to shift an equilibrium, whether it's the equilibrium of education, whether it's the equilibrium of healthcare, and it may be a low non-performing equilibrium, but it indeed is equilibrium. It doesn't budge from there. What does it take to shift an equilibrium? While people were wondering, how do you get more and more efficient at delivering the services, we were spending more and more time trying to think, how do we restore the agency of the ecosystem that allows us to drive the delivery in a very different fashion. When we're looking at large institutions and how they grow, whereas we were more and more talking about how do you build a shared infrastructure that can allow many, many institutions to come up and do what is right. One of the analogies we have used very often in the past is, what does it take to create the GPS of education, the GPS of healthcare, the GPS of livelihoods, rather than straight away jump into what does it take to create the Uber of education or the Uber of healthcare, because in the absence of fundamental infrastructure or shared infrastructure, it's very hard to innovate and drive change at scale. The second big set of questions that we started debating was that everybody was sort of quite worried about, how do you distribute solutions? And we said, how do you distribute the ability to solve? And that led us to many sub-questions saying that, should we deal with mega issues or should we deal with millions and thousands of micro problems? And what does it mean? Do we look for better solutions or do we look for better ability to solve? And how do you actually create infrastructure that can distribute this ability? Do we think about collaboration or do we worry about, can you please mute your end? Collaboration versus thinking about co-creation. And that led us to thinking of, what does it take to create open infrastructure? So on the previous one, I was talking of +1 thinking, and here talking of open infrastructure. And the last big question we were talking about was controlled evolution, the whole idea of impact and measurement and evaluation, and how do you really get scale vis-a-vis how do you do extensive co-creation so that impact is driven by network effects rather than controlled experiments, which led us to think about, should we be getting better and better at workflows, or should we be getting better at value exchange? Should we control the ecosystem with data, or should we empower the ecosystem with data? Should we look at more and more standardization, or should we look at defining more and more standards? Essentially the idea of network effects. So sort of 3 broad themes that we pulled out, and obviously today on the call, we have limited time, so I'm not going into each theme. But essentially, how do you design programs for transforming education, healthcare, financial inclusion, livelihoods that work at scale, distribute the ability to solve, and embrace extensive co-creation with network effects? And in summary, this is what we sort of created as the framework, if you will, with all the learning, all the knowledge that we had curated, all the design construct, design principles, etc., into a construct where we could define a development mission focused on a specific focus area, could be education of migrant children, it could be healthcare and nutrition of tribes that have highest level of under 5 child mortality, whatever be the focus area, which essentially looks at how do you catalyze rapid change at population scale sustainably. So that is where, let me just sort of pause here, because this was the genesis of the whole idea. And I will obviously share more about what is this idea, what are its design principles, etc. But the genesis was, how can we drive equilibrium shifts by distributing the ability to solve and leverage network effects across society, civil society, government, private sector, all the actors. That's why the use of the word societal. So societal platform was not thought about as an object, as a technology, but as a way of thinking. And so let me pause here for a few minutes. Would love to get some ideas, some reactions. What are you thinking? Questions?
Hi, Sanjay.
Hi.
This is Girisha from People.
Hi, Giri.
Hi. No, I know we've discussed a lot about these ideas, and it's wonderful to understand the genesis of the approach that has been taken on societal platform. I think the one big, I think it's wonderful, and I think there's a lot of power in what you're saying. The one thing that I would love to understand more is the point that you made around what do you mean when you say how do you distribute the ability to solve problems versus distributing solutions. Just what that means would be helpful.
That's a good question, Girish. Thanks a lot. So when we were understanding how do you build such large platforms which could serve a population scale, we realized that we have to deconstruct the problem into three layers. Things which are context independent. For example, if you are working in education, the ability to create a lesson plan or a learning plan is context independent. Then you have to create some components which are context aware. For example, if you're creating a lesson plan for geometry, and then there are some components which are context intensive, that you are creating this to teach geometry for this grade of students in West Bengal, and hence the content has to be in Bengali. So you are trying to sort of create these layerings so that there is no central entity that is creating all these solutions, but there are other NGO partners, there are other government actors, there are other local education people in that state, in that context, who can then use this infrastructure to create and use what is useful for them in their context, in their situation, in their socioeconomic conditions. And so what we mean by distributing the ability to solve is not package things and sort of give them out, but create more and more infrastructure that can help people in the common run of life, those who are actually entrusted with these responsibilities in the overall societal ecosystem, to do what they should be doing in a better way and building the solutions that work for them. Similarly, in financial inclusion, for example, we created loan markup languages, which essentially allow the first mile people to actually create loans on the runtime rather than any central person creating certain products. So I gave an education example because Girish, you and people work in the sector of education, and that's why. So I hope that sort of clarifies.
No, that is helpful. That actually links very well with the point that you said about creating standards and standardization. So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Sanjay.
Anyone else? You can also tell me how you're thinking. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, Charmi, how are you?
Hi, Sanjay. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
So I know we've had a couple of these conversations already in some other context, but I guess firstly, I'm really intrigued by this model, and it continues to play a sort of like a really important framing and benchmark for what we're thinking of at Harambee. But I wanted to ask specifically a question around brand. Sorry, I have kids running around me right now. But I wanted to ask a specific question around brand. At Harambee right now, we are working on a platform to engage youth in response to COVID-19, but we are moving from just looking at pathwaying them into opportunities to actually being a national pathwaying manager adopted by the presidency. But we've had to pivot quite rapidly into a COVID response platform as well. So we're engaging with partner youth organizations to provide youth-facing services, as well as provide messaging around COVID. And I guess my question is around brand. So we are an operator that is transitioning to a platform type model. And what we're struggling with the most, I think, at the moment is developing or leveraging the trusted asset that is our brand, because we are well known with youth, to being a platform operator that enables other partners as well. I don't know if you have any advice based on your own experience with Societal Platform or other partners that you've worked with that have managed such a transition successfully.
Sure. So we have seen typically three models. One model is the classical powered by model, which is you could integrate into multiple partners programs by saying you're powered by Harambee, which is the typical Intel Inside branding construct, because the inherent brand of Harambee is very valuable to the ecosystem. The second is where the program and the platform. So as we go forward, we'll talk about the whole idea of programs, solutions, and assets. And so, programs can have their own branding and platform can have its own branding. That is a construct that we have seen. For example, I'll shortly talk about Avantia platform, where Avanti is a financial inclusion platform which can be used by different programs which have their own branding. And that's the second one, where there's a not sort of inside, but besides. And third is where we are seeing that it leads to the creation of a third independent brand, which could be a national brand. For example, that's what we saw in the work we do in EkStep at Education Foundation, where the ministry decided to launch a platform as a national asset and gave it a national brand. And then, of course, there are multiple people who have come together, in which case you have to let go of the brand. But it depends on situations. So sometimes you want to co-brand, sometimes you go inside, and sometimes we have seen people moving into a completely third new brand, which is way more powerful from a national transformation perspective, rather than the brand of the starting initiative.
Great. We have two raised hands, and I also want to make a point that there's no need to apologize for all the noises in the background, because we are all working from home, and that's what home sounds like. So we have two questions. We have one from Haywood, and we have one from Ashraf. So Haywood, would you want to go next?
Yes, I mean, it's maybe more of an observation, or I'm still exploring to understand how to apply this in my area of interest. I'm an emergency medicine doc, and I'm involved in developing training for emergency care. And as you can imagine, we're really right smack in the middle of all of this mess. Work in the United States and in Mexico and Latin America. This whole COVID epidemic is really, I think, obviously made a big impact. By definition, that's what a pandemic is. But it's shown where the weaknesses are of the system, and it has gotten to the point where people are being waved away from emergency departments, and so there's really, that implies a bigger shift of care or of attention or of functionality away from emergency departments. Obviously, some things have to continue to be handled there, but so one is trying to figure out how to better decentralize care even in emergencies, and the other has to do with epidemiologic surveillance, so we can see what's going on in the community. This is something that obviously, almost by definition, is at scale. And it's really hard for us to get from the point where at the small level, micro level, people may be inputting their symptoms or whatever in some kind of a record or in some context, and then extrapolating all of that into things that are potentially threatening on a population level. So, you know, those are my interests here. I'm still wrestling with a lot of how, you know, how this may wind up. We are also undergoing a big digital transformation, and this is an important part of it. And more than anything, I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to participating. I don't know if I made any particular question there at all, more than a statement, but that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Haywood, and I totally understand the perspective, and obviously great to connect with you again. And the question is, this is an emergent area, and even we are racking our brains on what does it take to apply this to the COVID situation. And we have some preliminary thoughts, which I'll talk about towards the third part of the discussion today. So absolutely, because there are multiple dimensions of this problem of COVID that we have to think through. One is, of course, responding here and now, but I don't think this is only about responding here and now, but also thinking about how do you create something that can sustain our future in the wake of the COVID crisis. So thanks for sharing the thought. It's still emergent, given that the problem itself is a new and rapidly emerging idea. But we are holding it, and we'll come back to this, Haywood, as we go along the discussion today.
We'll take one more we'll take one more question, and then we'll come back to the people who have raised. So Ashraf, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. And it's a really good, that 5-minute brief that we had just now was really outstanding. Thank you so much. It really flows with the philosophy and the purpose of a lot of the work that we are doing in the Youth Collective. My question actually, it may not be a question right now, and we can hold it through the conversation today, but I really love the way you talk about it as the GPS, and therefore it's a platform where everybody comes and does their own thing and own it in that sense. The worry right now we are having in everything in relation to collectivization in our work, and I won't go into details, is in a way a little bit connected to the previous question, is around data privacy and how much will people collaborate and engage together in this current very, very surveillance-related context that we live in. So, which in youth work is very, very critical. What are we saying? What are we doing? So I'd just be curious at some point if we can explore that, or you can share with us more on it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thanks, Ashraf, for bringing that up, because any platform thinking would have to be deeply embedded into what is the thought process around data privacy, and all those kind of factors. A very important section of this. And as we go further down the line, we will talk a bit more about this. So good that you raised this question, because that is a very central idea as well as you go along. And we have been working on something which we call as the data empowerment and protection architecture, which I will not be touching upon today, but yes, I will touch upon this facet of societal platforms as we go down in our short conversation today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashraf.
Okay, we'll take one question from the chat box where Sumed is asking us, how do you establish sync on the understanding of the problem? What are we trying to solve? How do we get everyone on the same page?
That's a very good question, because the kind of, for example, if you take literacy and numeracy of children, it is not something that is amenable to one solution. And that is why, because a solution can be a function of socioeconomic backgrounds, environment, demographics, politics. And so what we try to do is at the infrastructure level, not think of a solution, but think of an infrastructure that can help create more and more solutions, and create a solution ecosystem that creates more and more solutions in the context of the local problems. And so, like in any other platform thinking, and I'm sure you have done that in your other platform uses as a consumer, you would realize that one of the important aspects of platform thinking is not to build it for a solution, but create an ecosystem that can. So for example, if I was solving for literacy of K-5 children, now there could be solutions that work on the teacher, there could be solutions that work on the school ecosystem, there could be solutions that work on the parents, there could be solutions that work on the curriculum, and there is no one answer. But the question is, and we discussed this topic many a times, the question is not how do you create a uniform solution which requires you to have a uniform understanding of the problem, but you create a unified infrastructure which allows you to have a unified understanding of the problem. So the question is, there will be multiple facets to answering any problem. These are very complex problems, and no one answer is the right answer or the complete answer. So how do you not focus on uniform, but unified construct or design. So that has been one of the important design principles of how we've been approaching this.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. Ryan, Harishkesh, and Nilankshi will come back to you in a bit. So yeah, over to you, Sanjay.
Oh, okay. All right. So let us continue the discussion. There are more questions coming in, which Sana, would you please keep a back so that we are able to address them as soon as we stop. Some more examples might probably answer a few more dimensions as we go down. So let's talk about a few illustrations. So we said if we were to work with the Sustainable Development Goals as our basic framework of the kind of problems that we want to work towards, then we are essentially looking for services for 3.4 billion people across the world who earn less than $5.5 a day is the construct we took. And these challenges in different countries, they don't have to be only a challenge in India. How do you ensure that we are able to respond to them in a much more, so to say, structured manner, or a different way of trying to solve the problem? At no point in time should you assume that we have found all the answers or there is a silver bullet. Such things don't exist. It is an approach to explore another pathway, to explore a possibility. And let me share some experiences. So we chose 5 focus themes to work on. One was the focus theme of lifelong learning, which is from early childhood through till skilling, retirement, the entire continuum of lifelong learning of people. We looked at financial inclusion and inclusion from multiple dimensions: lending, credit, savings, insurance. We looked at personalized healthcare, ranging from access to quality to capacity, different dimensions of healthcare. We looked at sustainable habitats, the environments we live in, which could range from water, urbanization, justice, climate, and we looked at emerging livelihoods, which essentially is to focus on things like micro-entrepreneurship, livelihoods of farmers, artisans, small and growing, if you say, livelihood sectors, and so on and so forth, because all of these are done in the context of what does it take to create scale. So we looked at these, and then we went ahead and started defining a model, essentially a model so that we could wrap our head around a problem. And so for every one of the problems that we are picking as a mission, we would look at what is the impact amplification networks required? What are these networks? Who are the actors in the civil society? Who are the actors in the government? Who are the actors in business, which will have to come together to actually amplify the impact on the ground? So how do you even design these networks? How do you select the actors? How do you forge the relationships? So one stream of work, which is around creating these networks. Second is creating this ecosystem of innovators around capacity, effectiveness, and governance of the problem itself. How do you improve the capacity of the ecosystem to solve the problem? How do you improve its effectiveness and the governance? So looking at innovators, looking at different NGOs working in the space, looking at different people trying newer and different kinds of solutions. Tech, non-tech was not the question, but essentially it was anything that people are trying, and see if there are components of those solutions that could be infrastructured and shared across the ecosystem. And the third track was more about building a shared enabling infrastructure. How do you share knowledge? How do you share processes and protocols? How do you share data? How do you share connections? What I'm using the term as graph, but essentially connections between the different actors. And how do you create a shared technology backbone? So taking any one problem, trying to model it around networks, co-creation environments, and infrastructures to understand how do we even sort of say structure this problem to start even thinking about what could be a way to solve it. But at the same time, when we're doing this, it was very important for us to hold dear certain core values. Because if we don't hold these core values dear to us, we might get sucked into creating solutions which may be platform in nature, but which may not be societal in nature, because societal problems are way more complex. And so there were 10 important value design factors that we looked at as to how do you ensure that these solutions we are creating or the program that we're creating restores the agency of the ecosystem, restores the agency of the participants, rather than captures environments or create aggregations which could be problematic over time, or create concentration of power and stuff like that. How do you resolve for diversity of the ecosystem? How do you catalyze the important interactions between the different actors? Because no one organization, no one function of the government can solve a problem at scale. You have to catalyze, but interactions, if you have to catalyze, then the value has to be win-win. It is not win-win. How do you ensure that? How do you connect different people on common objectives, common motives? How do you ensure that there are actors who are playing role of being a system leader by essentially identifying where are the blocks, what are the things to work on? How do you actually distribute the solvability? It's easy to say distribute the ability to solve, but how are you understanding whether it is indeed distributing the ability to solve, or it is just making things available and saying, now it's open, go figure it out. That's not actually distributing the ability. There's a lot more that needs to be done. How do you inspire co-creation? How do you open value creation so that a societal platform by its design does not capture any value? All the actors that play on top of it actually are the ones who capture value. And the society at large is the one who's supposed to capture value. How do you design for that? Because you could create walled gardens, you could create closed ecosystems. And so it was important for us to focus on that value. How do you build public goods? Very important question again, because in this entire endeavor to create open infrastructure, we have to be very clear about definitions of public goods. How do you ensure that things are available easy to access, with no barriers, no walls, no boundaries? And we define different dimensions of public goods, like what does it mean to be technically open? What does it mean to be philosophically open? What does it mean to be financially open? What does it mean to be legally open? Because it's important for us to ensure that these goods indeed are national open resources. What is the role of data? Data privacy, data security, and how do you ensure that data structures are not controlling but empowering? And what does it mean to even design data like that? And no platform, and we always have this thing saying, when we go live with a program, it will be wrong to begin with. So we have a lot of work to do, that we create a culture where we rapidly evolve and we are able to constantly change this literally on a runtime basis, rather than think about a very hard cast program, which is designed for a long time and then implemented with much pain and care, and it's obsolete the moment it is actually implemented. We went ahead and designed a series of design principles. How do you design networks? How do you design programs? How do you design change management? Because large scale transformation requires a lot of habit transformations and a lot of different kinds of relationships, motives, policies. We also looked at how do you design value interactions? How do you design technology, architecture itself? How do you design the graphs, connections, and how do you design data? So all of these kind of detail today, I don't intend to go into each of these and their sub-design principles of how to design these different things. And you design an execution framework, saying from the point you want to imagine a change to actually going through aligning, catalyzing the ecosystem, mainstreaming your program, and empowering with data. What are the different elements, different processes, not necessarily in a sequence, but what all does it take to create a complex, large national infrastructure is something that we synthesize. Of course, all this knowledge continues to evolve as we continue to practice. And then we said, let us put this to practice in these themes. So as we speak, there are about 25 odd initiatives which are in different stages of flight. And as we practice, we learn. As we practice, we learn, because that's the way we love doing it. Let me give you a few examples. So the EkStep Foundation itself has been working to help the Ministry of HRD actually realize its objective of creating a national teacher platform. It's called Diksha. Diksha got rolled out in almost all the states of India now. Almost half the teachers of the country are currently active on the platform. And this is something where a lot of the learnings that we have gleaned over time is something that we are bringing to bear and helping in the ways that we can to roll out this important initiative for the government of India. And what's important is that, because of this platform's evolution today, learning is visible at a national scale. Slowly, steadily, we are getting a sense of what is going on, or what is the state of education, how things are not through some one-time impulsive conversation, but on a runtime basis, literally on a daily basis, hourly basis, trying to get a sense. And then that information is what the entire system, which is the key actors in the government and the different partners, are then looking at how do you use that to improve the state of education over time. So this is a journey that has begun in a very big way, if you will. And in specific to the context of COVID, as we are now here over the last few weeks, while everybody was sort of moving towards work from home and schooling at home, but one important aspect is that there's a large mass of Indian students who can't necessarily learn from home. They may not have access to all the high cost, high quality softwares and technologies available for learning. And Diksha has now become a very interesting backbone because it is available in every home because it's a national public good with all the curriculum and the content aligned to the different topics and subjects. So the system is now working on saying, how do we ensure that these times in COVID do not further the divide education over the next few months to come? We are actually able to bridge it because such an infrastructure is available, which is not available in other countries, to be able to take it to the people who do not have any ability to pay for any education on any sophisticated system. So that's an example I wanted to share. Second example, quickly, Avanti, which works in affordable financial services, where this platform has interestingly been put together with the idea of creating a digital disruption and a capability for people who have never borrowed money in their life. How do you actually help them borrow money at much lower interest rates based on their digital footprints? This platform, as we speak, has now gone live just across the beta state. It's spreading across the different states of the country. About 18 customized loan products, the 70 districts in 7 states, about 12 million disbursed so far. And it's scaling out. And what I wanted to stress upon was the fact that just week before, we had a deep down conversation of, in the context of COVID, what does lending mean? What is the role of financial inclusion as millions of people who have been displaced would now figure out how to restabilize their lives. And this is becoming an interesting backbone for many of our partners, such as some of the ones listed on this, who are now thinking about how can they respond to the impending financial challenges that will come on to us and the people at large over time. The third one is, of course, a program called ECHO, with roots in University of New Mexico, and now working also in India as ECHO India, which fundamentally works on the model of moving knowledge, not people. And it's a very interesting evolution again, where they work on building the capacity of remote healthcare workers as well as healthcare workers across the entire ecosystem. And this platform today is becoming one of the major backbones for disseminating all the knowledge around ECHO and Haywood. You were talking about this issue. It's been a very interesting journey over the last 3 weeks, where ECHO is doing different kinds of deployments along with the system. This is just one example of how recently, just I think 21st or 22nd, they deployed entire ventilator support system across the country, and in one shot, getting this knowledge across to different parts of the country as well as remote areas, and with the intent of actually quickly disseminating very good quality mentoring and counsel so that people can actually figure out what to do. And now, as we are walking into the months ahead, we are working intelligently and deeply on how do you leverage something like this for the situation at hand as well. eGov is another example. It's a platform for transforming urban governance, currently live in 1754 cities and towns. Service about 160 million citizens, essentially focuses on streamlining the operations of the urban management system as well as addressing the grievances of citizens at large. But why I brought this example up is that it also has a very wide ecosystem of partners across government, civil society, private sector, etc. But when the whole COVID thing came up, because that infrastructure existed, they were able to rapidly put together, literally in a matter of hours, an infrastructure to provide safe pathways to residents and essential service providers. Because when the cities are under lockdown, it's very important for us to, at scale, across millions of people across the country, to be able to give safe pathways, so that people can get back to at least ensuring that people who need health support or who need essential services are able to move around. So this is just starting to deploy out. But I just wanted to say that a platform that was built for urban governance has many uses when you have to go through a situation like this. I could go on and on, but I just wanted to also be mindful of the time that we have. I'm also very proud to say that one of the most exciting things that we are excited about is a journey that we have kicked off with Ashoka Fellows, where we are looking forward to taking all of this learning to some of the brightest leaders that I have met through that process. Of course, some of them are also on the call, but essentially with the idea that all this learning in the context of what they're doing, how can we quickly bring this knowledge and spark off more and more journeys over and above the 25 odd journeys that we're already working on? How do we create these 30 plus journeys that we are now at the edge of getting started with? So this was to give you an example that how do you bring different networks, different innovation ecosystems with a shared digital backbone to come together, share a bunch of design principles, design programs, design solutions, and work. And these were some of the examples that I thought I'll share with you to sort of just bring this idea to life. So let me take a pause again. Any ideas, any observations, questions?
So I think we'll take Ryan's question, but there was one question based on the examples that you shared saying, could you give us an example where it has not worked and why, where probably challenges, if you could you just quickly highlight that, please?
Oh, yeah, of course. So typically, now it's very important to understand what is the meaning of worked, because, you know, we always used to have this conversation in our team saying, worked means that a point of closure has been reached. What we have realized in most of these journeys are some things work slower and some things work faster. But there are some cases where the system leaders, who essentially are the ones who are the catalysts in this entire journey, if they're not able to mobilize the actors in the system to at least come together on the basic meeting grounds, then it becomes very, very hard. Or if there are system leaders who are more intent on scaling their organization and not the ecosystem, it becomes very, very hard. So there have been examples where we started up, but these system leaders wanted to actually focus on scaling what they were doing rather than distributing the solutions rather than distributing the ability to solve. And so it was not a good idea. So we always backed up. There are some cases where we might take a lot of time because a lot of early experiments may fail, because this is a very high evolution, high risk kind of possibilities also exist. So we try, right? So that's why it's difficult for me to say, has it failed? Even the examples I gave you has failed many times. And there are some who have failed and stopped, and there are some who have failed and persevered. And over time, things have emerged out. So failing, starting seems to be a part of the process itself, because you don't know what is that minimalistic infrastructure till you build a few, discard a few, make a few pivots. Even the journey of EkStep, we have made 7 pivots. So literally you could say that thing failed 7 times till where we are now. And in all the platforms, failing is integral to the process rather than you say we will not go this way, which happens when the system leader says, I can't do this, I can't take it forward. Then of course, there is no point.
Great. Ryan, would you like to ask your question now?
Sure. So I typed it in because my Wi-Fi is a little spotty, but so I'm a non-technical systems leader that am currently applying these principles offline, and just wanted to see if you had any advice or examples of non-technical system leaders and how they recruited and kind of communicated with programmers to actually build the technology.
Sure. So I don't know if any of my friends from ECHO are today on the call, but when we started the journey of, is
Justina is on. I
Hi,
think.
Justina. How are you?
Hi, Sanjay. This is Justina, and I think Kartik is here too.
Okay, so I'm going to answer you on your behalf because this is my best example always is. So ECHO, the system leaders of ECHO are actually doctors. So Dr. Sanjay Purohit is a hepatitis C specialist. Dr. Sunil Anand is a pulmonary specialist. Dr. Kundra is a surgeon. So it's a team of doctors, no techies. And yet they have embarked on a most amazing journey called Digital ECHO. And Justina and Kartik who are on the call have been leading the charge. And so Ryan, for your question, I do not believe that the leaders of the mission need to be technologists. They need to understand what is the field that they're working in, what is that, and of course we can always balance it out with the kind of talent required, and build out the rest of the infrastructure. Most of the missions, actually, we find that the mission leaders are not necessarily technology leaders because this is not about technology first. It is about technology enabled.
Great. Justina, do you want to pitch in?
Thank you, Sanjay. This was exactly what I would have said, that I think it's what we've learned through working with you is really the understanding the core of what we're trying to solve and the problem, and engaging people in co-creation. And so many, and I know, Sahana, you said don't apologize for the noises at home, but I will, because some things are completely, just one second.
Okay, so while okay, yeah.
But I would say that technology is an enabler, just like Sanjay said, and we've learned that that is not, while super important, it is really not the core. It's really to understanding the mission and figuring out ways to use societal platform principles to really further the mission, with technology being a part of it.
Great. Thank you, Justina. In the interest of time, I'm going to take 2 more questions, but we will answer all the questions or connect directly with you. If you're not able to answer this during the next, we have half an hour. So Subbu, would you like to go next? Subbu, are you online? Okay, we are not able to hear him. Can I request Nilankshi to share your questions, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is related to, again, data privacy and protection, etc., which you just touched upon, Sanjay. Probably this would be a time when you can slightly elaborate on it. How the actors are, as well as the system leaders, are responsible for and accountable for the use and abuse of data.
Right. So when we are working through design of any of these programs, one important element is how do you design the data empowerment and protection architecture. What essentially it means is how do you first and foremost try and not bring in any personal information into the platform, and if you do, then what are the constructs of privacy and purpose and protection. So I think on one side, technologically ensuring security, etc., is table stakes anyways, right? So that there is no breakdown, hacking, stealing, and all those kind of things. So that's a technological architecture question. But I think more important things are around policy. For example, when we work with ECHO, there are a lot of HIPAA regulations that are also a part of the whole game plan. When we look at the work we're doing in education, not getting into the identity of students or getting into personally identifiable information around teachers. So I think one of the important facets that we have tried to understand is when you do platform play, it's okay to work at aggregate abstract level rather than to get down to individual, unless individual information is important to render some service. And hence all the constructs of virtualization, tokenizations, creating different kinds of redactions, abstractions. So very, very careful, thought through architectural construction and design, so that data, and the ultimate holy grail of that design is that the data does not reside actually in the platform, but the data design resides with the user, and the platform gets access to it based on the need. But that's a much more complicated technological construct. We have started on the journey in a few areas like financial services, etc. But the ultimate evolution is then in that direction. Today, it is privacy by design, security by design, and all the requirements as per the regulations required in that country. And even if, for example, in our case in India, some of the regulations are still in the making, but meeting those requirements is a fundamental design construct to even get the platform off the ground.
Thanks, Sanjay. I think we'll continue and take the questions post the last bit.
All right. There are a few more questions though. Do you want to really?
There is a question on COVID because we have half an hour. So you could take a call and take it from here.
Okay. So there are some questions that I'm seeing on. I have a question from Venkat here. How are uniform and unified different in this context? I don't know, Venkat, if you're online, but could you clarify your question a bit?
I don't think he's online.
Okay, because I could not really. All right. So let me move forward and.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Now, Sanjay, this question was asked earlier. There was a context in which you said that, how do you ensure that these platforms are not uniform but unified? And so I was curious to see if you could share an example to illustrate the difference between uniform and unified. In the context of not trying to offer one standard solution, but
I hope you got your answer.
Not exactly. A simple example would help. Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at a simple example. Say, let's look at it in the context of, let me see, what could be, let's look at the context of lending. So a unified but not uniform infrastructure, like the example I gave you of Avanti. Now, one form of a lending platform could be that there is a platform which has standardized lending products which are created by some kind of a central team, or even if it is state-wise, district-wise, but certain products are created, a product line, and they are loan products which are then deployed across the ecosystem. So the platform acts as a distribution method rather than a creation method. So a uniform platform would be where you have so for example, I have $45,000 of loan for a buffalo, for a pair of buffaloes, and that product is available through the entire platform to all the participants that are connected through the NGO partners who are working in different states with the farmers, etc. So that's one construct of uniform, so to say, solution being deployed. Unified is where the capabilities from loan origination to loan management to collection, etc., are capabilities of the platform, but the product that you create at the end stage could be a function of the context in which you are seeing the need, and you decide what should be the value, underwriting, the monitoring, etc., using a unified infrastructure, but it is not necessarily requiring you to use a uniform product. Now, an extension of that example is tomorrow you could connect other platforms to this, which through their own interfaces could come in and connect. So this is not only about a platform, it could be multiple platforms which can be unified because of standards, interoperability, protocols, APIs, etc., and offer a different route of services or different set of services, but still it is not uniform. It's more unified. Unified sort of lends itself to interoperability, configurability, connected networks, rather than one network uniformly spread and scaled across the ecosystem.
Got it. So basically, data architecture that allows multiple, criteria to be used by multiple players of sorts.
It could be in data architecture. It could also be in the way microservices are organized. So it may not be only data. It could be the way you design your microservices, how modular or micro are you.
Got it.
All right. So